Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great honour to acknowledge that we are all on Gadigal country, unceded land of the Eora Nation, and a land that my family has prospered on for generations, and it has been great thanks to the people who have cared for this place for millennia, not just for 5-10 years, but for millennia, that yes, we are all able to be here. I pay my respects not just to the ancestors of long ago, but to the leaders of today and those of tomorrow, particularly in a time of climate change, where the knowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders hold of their custodianship of country is something that none of us can afford to ignore, along with the humanitarian issues that have been raised in the referendum and issues of great knowledge and sharing that we all enjoy and learn from through the artistic and cultural works of the people of this country. Today we are all here for the Being Collected lecture. It's a lecture series that was started by Rosemary Stack, a Noongar lady who worked at the Macleay Museum and previously worked in Black Deaths in Custody commissions and Tramby and other institutions. And she really thought there was a need back in 2007 for a specific lecture series to listen to and to learn from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander curators and arts workers. And so that is Being Collected. I want to give you a sense of what you might have missed out on, but hopefully you haven't, that you might have heard in years past from Dawn Casey, Thalia Anthony, Mervyn Bishop, Brenda Croft, Danny Millar, John Mundine, Nadi Simpson and Kalina Briggs, Keith Munro, Genevieve Greaves, Marie Clark, Verena South, Tina Baum, Gilda Andrews, Matt Cole, Gay Sculthorpe, and today Emily McDaniel and Hayley Miller-Baker. It has been a huge number of different kinds of talks, which is animated through songs, through dance, through politics, through law, and today we will hear from Hayley, a Gunjamara and Jabberwong visual artists from Melbourne, whose work we will celebrate after the lecture conversation finishes. Hayley's work has been hugely recognised through a number of prestigious art prizes, the National Photography Prize, the Darburn Art Prize, the Churchie National Emerging Art Prize, and many others. You will have seen some of her works such in a variety of different programs across Sydney and also nationally as her work has toured. Emily McDaniel is an independent curator, writer and educator from the Kalari clan of Wiradjuri peoples in central New South Wales. With a background in learning and public programs, she's worked across different organisations to connect country, community, and to encourage change. She's also been awarded a number of prestigious awards, including the Venice Biennale Professional Development Program, and has worked in UTS, in the NAS Gallery, in Australian Design Centre, and you might know some of her work from the Barangaroo precinct. We're very grateful to both of them for being here today and to be able to welcome you into a conversation that they will have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jude. Thanks, Jude. And both Hayley and I would like to begin by recognising the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land that we are meeting on today. We also want to acknowledge the context that we're meeting in today. Both Hayley and I agreed to do this conversation as we knew it would surround the referendum in October 14. We asked the Australian public to recognise our sovereignty in the Constitution and also to institute an advisory panel, the voice to the nation. And the Australian public spoke, and 60%, 9 million people of this country decided that we did not need a voice. we agreed to do this conversation, and we thought we're going to have one of two conversations. Today, you're getting the other conversation. This would have been a very different conversation had we been sitting in a climate of yes. So I would like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander members in the audience. And I want to share that this is a vulnerable moment for us where we have felt all feelings that we have been gifted as humans. Rage, heartbreak, anger, sadness. And so today is not a lecture because we haven't got that in us. It is a conversation. And Hayley and I, we've worked together for a number of years in many different instances. So I feel that this is a continuity of a conversation that we will be having in public, not just in front of our computers today. It will be a conversation between the two of us, back and forth, weaving what we choose to share with you. And please note that at the end of our conversation, we won't be answering questions today. And that's because what we choose to offer you today is what we feel we can offer you. So we ask you to hold that. And maybe perhaps those questions that you have, it's your responsibility today to sit with them and to see if you can find that within viewing Hayley's work. Nick Tenasty, I've finally gotten the hang of saying it. So let's start, and thank you for your consideration regarding that. It has certainly shaped how we choose to interact with each other publicly and with audiences. And for me, this is my first public engagement since that very, very sad day. But Hayley, I want to go back to not the beginning of your practice, because I feel that would be birth, pretty much, or your mother's, grandmother's, great-great-grandmother's birth, and many more since time began. But the moment that you began to explore the medium of photography and how you started to think about how you interacted with audiences, you mentioned something, and it was quite pivotal around how you structured that relationship with the viewer, around timing and generosity in the ways that we look.
Yeah. So, sorry. I think I would like to state that I'm not a photographer, although I work with photography. I was not trained in photography. I was gifted an archive of photographic negatives from my nan, which were my grandfather's. And I guess it's that generosity that you were just saying. I decided that I would be generous with our family stories and that I would educate. I would choose to educate my peers during my master's degree and share our stories and go and be above and beyond what was being asked of me within the arts, which I think is just a core trait within Aboriginal people, to be so generous. And when I began making the photographic work, I was met with a lot of criticism and critique for the content, that how would people know that these are stories of Aboriginal people, that they're not Aboriginally enough, and that I would have the audience's attention in the gallery for approximately 3 seconds, as the average person who visits a museum or gallery will look at a piece of art for 3 seconds before moving on. And how was I going to get somebody to look at my work and take in that story or that narrative with 3 seconds? And I had to figure out a way, if I were to want anyone to learn or to know our stories, I needed to figure out a way to get past that 3 seconds.
This series, being called Being Collected, is something that we we sat with for a while when we both agreed to do this, because coming back to that notion of generosity, of giving, someone gives and someone receives a collection, someone gives up a collection. In this instance, I was really interested to see if our conversation can be beyond cultural institutions and really be about audiences, viewers as collectors of experience, collectors of memory, of cultural material, of story, given so generously by artists such as yourself. In that moment of giving, you also then moved away from looking at your photographic works to feeling that really you needed to employ other mediums such as film. What drove that decision?
I came to a place in my practice where I very plainly felt that the institutions and audiences had made me feel that I had exploited my family stories and our history. And it was quite devastating. I was giving so much, and rarely was I receiving back. I became a token of some sorts to a lot of institutions who would want to work with me, but they would want very specific stories and very specific narratives within that work together, which it just takes a toll. It takes a toll. And so during that COVID break, that 2 years, I really got to sit with myself and come to terms with that this was not serving me, that I had made all of these works. I think I made 6 photographic series between 2016 and 2019, which is quite a lot of work. And I decided to put my family stories to rest. I have since retired them to let them sleep and to let them rest and to give myself that space between speaking on them and showing them. But they live within collections, and that is the way that they live on. So they've become the responsibility of others now to carry on that narrative for me, because I've done my work by creating them, for putting those stories out, for getting them into collections and archives and written about in books. And that I feel that I was comfortable enough to say, I've done my work here with that space, and I need to step back to look after myself. So within that 2 years of COVID, I guess it was quite a big growth period for me, and to just reckon with all of that and decide where I was going to go forward. And not just that, but how was I going to work from here, and what was I going to give and what was I not going to give that would not take more of me than what I could allow.
How does film facilitate that renegotiation of your relationship with the viewer, the audience, the collector, in ways that photography just simply did not allow you to?
As somebody who my whole life is just dedicated to the arts, I'm always at galleries and viewing art myself. I'm very well aware of the time that I spend with artwork, and I do very often walk past, I look as I'm walking through, and I'm doing exactly what the audience is doing, yet I'm asking everybody, stick with me here. So I know that struggle, but not stepping away from photography, but stepping into film, what I was asking was that time with people, that every second that I put into one of my films, I wanted the audience to be there with me for those seconds. you have to experience it through that time. There's no use going in and then coming out before it finishes, because you don't get that whole scope of the narrative. You don't get the experience, and you don't get the intent of the creation. So I also had to juggle that, because I'm also not one to really stick with video as an audience member. And how do I do that? How do I do that? But also, how do I also stay okay with knowing that people will walk out? But I guess they won't get the experience.
And, you know, potentially many people who are joining us today haven't seen Nick Tenasti. Would you like to just describe it a little bit in the words that you'd like to offer without people having experienced it?
So Nick Tenasti sits within the genre of horror. It is a slow cinema, short filmic artwork. It more sits within film than it does. It's not video, it's film. It's a black and white work that centers a protagonist in her domestic space, in her solitude, and her evening rituals of undressing for the day. And by undressing, I mean getting ready for nightfall, of having a shower and washing the day off her, and getting into her pajamas and settling in for a movie with the TV. But she's actually performing these actions which reference activities. I wouldn't call it activities, actually. These ceremonial practices that care for the body and spirit after death. So while it seems like quite a relatable and mundane sort of 7 minutes in the home of watching this woman, she's undertaking these different rituals and performances to connect herself with the spirits. And yeah, so there's quite a lot of symbolism in it. It's something to read deeply into, which carries along through all of my work. And so it's up to the audience to bring their knowledge and to bring their creativity, I guess, as well, to the piece to finish it with your own conclusion.
We started working a number of years ago, particularly in how your work connected with students, and you've also had a career as an educator as well. And what we kept coming back to is the notion that information must be earned, not just simply learnt. It shouldn't just be easily given. It should be, there should be that generosity and reciprocity in order to receive that information. You started thinking a lot about that in terms of your photographic work and the multiple readings that one could have in front of them. When you're working in the medium of film, how do you allow those multiple entry points of your audience to bring their own story?
Yeah, so there's quite a difference between the photography and the film work, although there are a lot of crossovers as well. I guess with photography, the access points are all available to you from the second that you start looking at it, whereas film, you have to go along for the ride. You have to be there for its entirety, and then you have to watch it again, now knowing what you had seen, and continue to pick things up. So I guess going into the making of Nick Tenasti, I, as usual, planted small bits and pieces, but it was much less than and less didactic to what I would put in my photography. They're just, I guess, you're picking up feelings rather than imagery, although it is imagery sometimes. But I also got to work with sound, which can set you in the space. It sets you where you need to go to ride out the experience.
So this work was originally commissioned for ceremony by Hetty Perkins. Can you talk about that early conversation that really triggered your thinking through this work?
Yeah, so Hetty reached out to me at about 3 a.m. On a
Typical Het.
3 a.m. on a weekday. And it was just a really quick message that just said, hey, I'm curating the triennial. I really want you to be in it. Do you want to be in it? And I was like, yes, I do. I want to be in this. And we'd had a couple of conversations earlier and through the past couple of years, as I had with others, of my idea of shifting into film as the next continuum to my photography, because originally I was trained as a painter and I painted for roughly 10 years, and that wasn't giving me what I needed for my stories. And so I moved into photography to get what I needed for my stories. And then there became a point in the photography where the audience wasn't meeting me halfway, because it's this two-dimensional image. And while you can look at it and grow with it over time, I needed people to feel. And so film was the next step for me. And so she said, I know that you want to step into film. This could be it. And I said, yes, absolutely, yes. This is the perfect platform, the National Gallery of Australia, to premiere my first film. And then a while later, because it's quite a long process for the triennial, she had given us the themes, which were ceremony and ritual, and what that looks like in contemporary times, but also traditional, what big C ceremony and small C ceremony means. So things from men and women's business to, traditional, to what that means today. And I thought, to be authentic to myself after all of this time of sharing family stories and really focusing in on that and reauthoring history and reauthoring those stories, I wanted to, I guess, for the first time, really step into the space of the true author and focus on what is a ritual that I actively participate in. And that was a really tricky question, because I was like, nothing in there. I don't do anything really in there. Like, I eat breakfast, as we all do, and like lunch and dinner and get the kids ready. And there's nothing that is an everyday ritual that stuck out to me until there was one night where I performed this ritual, as I do every single night. And I was like, oh, that's a ritual, because I think ritual is quite not a scary word, but it's a very loaded word. And looking at it from that perspective of, well, what do I actually perform and what do I do that relates to my culture and who I am? And anyway, it was that connection to the spirits and whether I wanted to listen to them or not listen to them. And that's something that I decide each night before I go to bed. And so I knew that was it. But of course, with my storytelling, I stepping away from the photography, I thought, no, I need to come at this from a different angle. So I'm going to abstract that. I'm going to amplify some parts. I'm going to extract others. I'm going to really exaggerate and come at this from a film perspective, and come at this from a performance and horror genre perspective of really championing the female protagonist as not the damsel in distress, as holding that power and riding that power and sitting with her intuition as women so very obviously have such a higher power of intuition. So I really wanted to champion that, but situated in such a place. With the photography, there's all these cues and clues around that I leave, but have a multi-leveled experience that anybody who was watching it could come at it and understand it from one perspective to the other.
And being positioned at night was really significant for you, and particularly Nyctinasty as a phenomena. Could you explain how that interacts with the work itself?
So Nyctinasty is the action that plants perform. They don't perform it, but plants that act with the durational light, where they close up at nighttime to protect themselves from other species of plants or other animals that may come in the night and want to eat them or trample over them. And so they close up at nighttime to protect themselves. And then when the day comes again, they open back up to present themselves. And so I really wanted to balance that with the performances that we act on at nighttime, like I was saying before, where we shower off the day and we get ready for night. And it might just be as simple as closing our curtains so the outside world don't see in, to, locking the door, whatever we do at nighttime to protect ourselves, but taking that idea to the spiritual connection of how do we do that consciously or also unconsciously at nighttime. And maybe that's not looking in a mirror at nighttime, or perhaps seeing a shadow on the wall move, whether that is something that is external outside, just a tree branch shadowing, or whether it is something spiritual. So yeah, it was shot evening into that nighttime to show that change of dressing down from the day and protecting yourself into the night.
I first saw it at ceremony on that opening evening, which I only spent 2 minutes in it. I think I am part of that club that doesn't always spend the time I need to with film work, but I think I've seen it 5 times now. And you sort of need to live into it and see yourself reflected into it. And watching audiences react to it has always been quite extraordinary. But what I've actually most enjoyed is on that opening evening night of ceremony, there was a massive group of community there for the opening. And to see what community's responses were, and that innate knowing and that accessibility of that information to them, I found was really, really poignant. And I'm always at constant awe of artists such as yourself that are able to create these sort of gateways that allow people to enter the work based on the information that they have. When people are looking at your work, what are you hoping that they're drawing from their own experience to that work?
Quite literally anything, any experience at all, whether that be speaking to the films, whether that be an interest in horror, an interest in films and cinematography, interest in spirituality and ghost stories, to just general interest in art. I want the films are, and my work is resolved in its own space, but the audience is required to also bring their experience and their knowledge and what they know of the world through their lives and their cultures and their families to round out that work.
How have you found your relationship has shifted to making since you've had this flexibility and breadth of interpretation through film? Do you feel that the labour that was previously placed upon you through your photographic practice has somewhat relieved?
Yeah, absolutely. I think working film is a lot more work than photography. although I get to work with a team, which is so much nicer, but I think that I get to, there's just such a freedom to it that I can suggest things via feeling or via sound without actually having to spend time in that space. Whereas photography, it's all visual. And so if I want somebody to be able to catch on to something, I would have to focus on how I was going to get that person to do it. You know what I mean? I've got, and I'll just briefly say, a series of works on massacres and how I was going to get the audience to learn that and get into that, and what I would need to include and what I was safe, how I was feeling safe to be able to do that, and then leave the works. Because once they go on the gallery wall, I'm away from them. So film is just such a, I don't know, it was a relief. It was a breath of fresh air. I got to figure out a way to work differently. Yeah.
More sustainably.
Yeah, it's more sustainable for me, and I really enjoy it. And I talk about my photography as puzzle pieces and how to put everything together to get that full story across. And film is the same, but there is just so many different paths to go down to get to what I wanted to say. I could have made this film 500 times over with that same narrative, but what was the right sequence for me, and what did I want to give to the audience, and what didn't I want to give, and what could I sit through and watch? And I swear I've watched it over 500 times in gallery spaces. I swear, like, not even the post-production watching over, but I just get so lost in it, and the sounds, and just watching myself, because I took on the role of the protagonist in this, also as a marker of a new chapter within my practice of stepping in front of the camera as the character and as the performer. And I don't know about everybody else, but I absolutely despise seeing myself in photos. I hate it. But this, I don't mind. I go through the notions with the protagonist, and I just watch her, and I'm there with her. And I did make it in a way though that the audience is somewhat of a peeping Tom. That you are there, you're there with her, watching her in that space. Yeah.
It is interesting that you positioned yourself as the protagonist, because as we're talking about care and generosity and what often ensues, exhaustion, I would have imagined that positioning yourself in front of the camera is the most vulnerable gesture that you could have toward your own work.
Yeah.
How did you find power within that offering?
I knew that I had to be in the first. So the film is part of a growing collection of films that is an ongoing project that I will be doing for the rest of my life. There will be a collection of short films by the end of my life. And for the very first one, I knew that everything that I had reckoned with through the closing and retirement of those photographic works, that I had to step into that space and I had to take that role just to start it off. That was all. It was just to start it off. And I am by no means comfortable in front of a camera or confident at all in front of people that are saying action. So it was very tricky, but at the end of the day, I knew that what I needed this work to be, and I knew that that was up to me. If I couldn't deliver, then this wasn't going to work.
Mm. And the protagonist in viewing the work, the sense that I get is she's deeply empowered and controlled and wielding the environment around her through those ritualized practices that are incredibly intimate. And I think that there's something very extraordinary about practicing culture and not necessarily performing culture. Who is it for? And I know it was asked of you before and you said it was a question that scared the hell out of you, but
Yeah.
I'm going to ask it again because perhaps the answer may have changed. Who do you make your work for?
Before Nick Dynasty, I made my work for the Australian audience. And as of Nick Dynasty, make my work for me. That as cheesy as that is, it's for me. It's what I would like to see and what I would like to experience in art and what I would like to celebrate. And also I did come to the realization that we're in this present moment in time, and who better to tell my stories than myself? So, just to jump into that and celebrate that and have these stories created into artworks that then become collected, and in 50 years' time or 100 years' time, people will be able to see that. Because quite often Aboriginal people are situated in spaces of history, not because they want to be, but because we have the responsibility to our family and to our community to be truth tellers and to have a voice. And I just couldn't really do that anymore. I had done as much as I could in public facing. I am very much there with all the activists at every protest and doing all of the work behind the scene, but public facing for my creativity, I needed something had to give.
If you could demand something of audiences, of viewers, of collectors in interacting with your work as the empowered protagonist that is wielding what is happening around her through controlled rituals, what do you want to ask of audiences when they meet you through reciprocity and generosity?
Just to stay with the seconds, sit through it, watch it in its entirety, watch it again, or come back to it later and watch it. Every second that I have chosen to include in it is there on purpose. It is there for you to experience. And I think that is probably the most powerful thing that an audience can do for an artwork or an artist is to stick with it, particularly in film, and go on that journey that the artist has given you.
Notion of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable seems to be what our next challenge will be. Not just sitting through a time-based work, through a number of iterations, but also this present moment that we're in today. And I'm sure as we've been talking, you've got many questions that you would love to put forward to Hayley. But what I would like to ask you to do today, and maybe try and hold on to it for a while, is to take responsibility of those questions that you had. Now, obviously, we've seen the misinformation really much supported by many governments today, but finding out for yourself. And what you will start to find, and I think that you've alluded to in your work, is that there is no one singular answer.
No.
There is not one singular answer. So all the many questions you hold today, it's your responsibility to answer them yourself, not to give them back to us, but to find that answer within your lived experience and to trust it, that is exactly in this moment what the artist wants you to draw from it. Now, as I mentioned before we began, both Hayley and I have made the conscious decision that we wanted to have this chat, see what emerged, see what we could offer you and leave that with you. And we won't be answering any questions. However, we do have a meeting downstairs that we will have for the opening and the launch. And I would also ask that you just be kind and generous in how you hold questions, particularly after this moment. So thank you.